Hello, and welcome for joining me for What is Systems Thinking and Why Should You Care? My name is Gene Bellinger. I am the host of the Systems Thinking World discussion group on LinkedIn, and I maintain the systemswiki.org wiki site. And over the session today is the first of two parts. The session on Thursday is a continuation of today, not a repeat of today. For those of, I noticed from the list there are a number of you who have not attended one of these sessions before. So the Systems Thinking World webinars wiki page, where you registered for this webinar itself, on the discussions tab for this page is an outline for this session itself. In other words, the links to all of the web pages that I will show you, some of them wiki pages, some of them models, you can access directly through this outline simply by double-clicking on them, and this outline is live so that you can expand it and contract it. And if the view, the embedded view, is too small, you can do a full-page view from here, and it'll give it to you in a full web window. The session is, or the outline is current for as long as it's current. The content of Systems Wiki continues to evolve over time. The models continue to change and evolve, so that I mean, it used to be that I had all of the outlines for a dozen different webinars in this outline, and they just over time got to be too out of date. So I'm keeping the last few of them, so that the one for last week is here, the one for this week, and over the weekend, the one for next week's session will be here also. So you can go to this location and actually access directly all of the different pages that I'll use during the session. And the video for this session will in fact be on this page within a couple hours after the session, and it'll be right here down under What is Systems Thinking and Why Should You Care, the Tuesday session, and then the Thursday session will get linked in also. All the videos, the sessions are recorded, they're uploaded to YouTube, and then the links put in here. And there are also here links to all of the webinars that have been done this year. Each one of them is about an hour long if you want to take a look at some of them. As indicated previously, the webinar is in fact free. If you find it beneficial and informative, small donations to help cover the overhead are greatly appreciated. And for those of you in the U.S., the donations are tax deductible, because Systems Thinking World is in fact a 501c3 nonprofit organization. And you can donate through PayPal or through Google with a PayPal account or with credit cards. And I'm talking about a small amount. I mean, 10, 15, 20 bucks. I'm retired. I do these because I think it's meaningful to do them, though I'm living on a fixed income, and there's an overhead associated with doing all this. And here's a summary of what the expenses and donations have been so far this year. So enough for the advertising. With regard to systems thinking, the questions are sort of endless in terms of what is it, what does it do, who are people systems thinkers, is it a natural way to be? You know, if you are a member of the Systems Thinking World discussion group, you've probably engaged or watched a number of these discussions unfold about people arguing about only 10% of the people are in fact capable of being systems thinkers. My perspective is the only person that I have ever met that wasn't a systems thinker were dead people. There in fact isn't anything that one can set out with an intent to do without some amount of systems thinking. It's a question of extent. Some people play chess and they learn the rules for moving the pieces and they play the next move. Some people look at the position of the pieces on the board and they figure several moves ahead, and some people look at the board and they attempt to figure out every sensible move from where they are to the end of the game. So that personally, I think that the extent to which we do systems thinking is a matter of degree. There is no way to avoid doing some of it, and even those, I mean, even after doing this for 30 years, there are times when I catch myself still being on autopilot and reacting and responding to things as opposed to reflecting and formulating a meaningful approach. Though, as people have continued to ask over the years, what do you do? I have, on an ongoing basis, tried to explain to them what I do, and you watch their eyes glaze over, and you know that you're not making progress. So a couple of months ago, someone asked me, and I caught myself, and I said, I know that if I try to tell them about systems thinking, they're just going to go the same place that other people have gone. They're just going to glaze over and wonder why they asked the question. So I caught myself, and this is what came out. I help people learn to solve problems so they stay solved and not create new problems in the process. Is this absolutely true? Well, to an extent. Is it always true? To an extent, though it works. It seemed to be a statement that captured their attention and imagination so that they asked questions, and we had a very nice conversation for a half hour, and the term systems thinking was never mentioned. So, you know, why it took 30 years, I don't know, but I'm just sharing that that point of learning with you that I found rather amazing. Our typical approach to solving problems is that we simply want them to go away. We sort of attack them with brute force and attempt, in most instances, to take things back to the way they were. I want the problem to go away, as opposed to, in fact, understanding the situation and figuring out a way to actually leverage that situation to move forward, to, in fact, if I'm going to expend the energy to deal with this situation, wouldn't it really be nice if after doing that it came out to be better than it was before I started, as opposed to simply trying to get things back to the way they were? So there is, in fact, a better way than the typical approach to solving problems. And in that, we have to realize that everything is, in fact, connected. The difficulty with that is that with everything being connected, it is, in fact, overwhelming. So from a systemic perspective, if we start with a situation that for some reason captures our attention and is one that we believe warrants some sort of attention to deal with it in some way, what we seek to do is understand the situation, understand the basis for the situation, with the realization that reality is, in fact, extremely complex and more often than not simply appears complicated, and that cause and effect are also more often than not separated by distance and time, though we need to develop an understanding that allows us to put together a strategy that improves or moves that situation forward at the same time that implementing it, in fact, minimizes the potential for unintended consequences, because our experience is that unintended consequences typically seem to make the situation worse than it was beforehand, or they create more problems that I or other people have to solve in the future. So this is my thought about the whole intent of doing systems thinking, is to, in fact, understand the situation to the point where I can, in fact, develop a strategy that deals with the situation and minimizes unintended consequences. This is back to learn how to solve problems so that they stay solved and don't generate new problems in the process. So let me get rid of some of these and go to the next set. I had always wondered at one previously why there was this open all bookmarks until I used to open these individually, and it was really annoying. To understand systems thinking, it's first appropriate to understand what a system is, and that the definition that I was extremely comfortable with for many years was a system is an entity that maintains its existence through the interaction of its parts. That being that it is in fact the relationship between the components of the system that interact on an ongoing basis that cause it to be what it is. Through ongoing discussions, I finally realized that I needed to change that phrasing just slightly, because a system that maintains its existence through the interaction of its parts has a tendency to give the system a purpose of its own, in that it is in fact influencing the interaction of its parts to maintain its existence, and that's not quite what was intended. I mean, it's true for extremely complex living systems, though systems to be generally appropriate or relative, I changed it to existence maintained via mutual interaction. So it is in fact the interaction between the parts that's responsible for the system existing, and it isn't the system influencing them to interact. It's just that interaction. Though through ongoing discussions, I also came to realize that that's a definition from the inside out, and it doesn't take into account that a system exhibits characteristics not produced by any of its parts. So that there is in fact something that emerges from the interaction of those pieces, one or more characteristics that you cannot find if you examine any of the individual parts. Now, there seem to be more definition, well, there seems to be at least one definition of system for every person that talks about systems. And if you're interacting with someone and they utter the word system, the immediate response from you should be, what does that mean? Because it is highly likely that your definition of system and their definition of system are not the same. And if they're not the same, there's going to be a disconnect in communication right from the beginning. So that, I mean, and you get into discussions with these people that talk about systems don't exist. Well, that the system is in fact a fabrication of one's perception based upon where one determines to identify the boundary and the interaction with what's outside the boundary, which is the environment for the system. The interactions are there and they exist. Where one chooses to draw the boundary defines the system that's being focused on or discussed. So there is a way to look at it and say, system is an artificial construct of one's perception, but the network of interactions are still there and they're happening. I mean, the tree that falls in the forest whether you're there or not. And you know, maybe I don't hear it and maybe nobody else hears it, but it still fell down, and if I go there and look, it's laying on the ground. All right? So the interactions happen. Where I choose to draw the boundary defines what it is that's the system. So in terms of some examples, if I think about a car, A car is an entity that will take me from point A to point B. All the pieces together provide it with a capability of doing that, though in the sense of the car, there are aspects of the car which are essential to that capability, and then there are those which are not. If the car doesn't have any wheels on it, it's not going to go anywhere. But I can take the doors off of it, and it still will take me from point A to point B. Maybe not quite as safely, but it still ends up being able to accomplish that emergent characteristic. So when one talks about the car as a system, well, if it's simply sitting there not doing anything, is it a system? Is it a system without a driver in it, so it's actually moving from point A to point B? And those discussions go on and on and on. There isn't an easy answer for it. A clock is a system which is constructed in such a way that the pieces interact to enable it to keep track of the passage of time. You can take it apart and look at all of the individual pieces, and there is nothing in those pieces that provides a sense of the passage of time. It is only when all of those pieces interact together that one gets a sense of, or the pieces can in fact do keep track of the passage of time. Water is in fact wet. Well, it's composed of hydrogen and oxygen, both of which at normal room temperature are gases. Neither one of them have any characteristic relating to wetness, and a single molecule of water in fact doesn't produce the characteristic of wetness. It's not until you have millions of them together and the molecules then in fact the way that they're interacting provide the characteristic of wetness. A pile of bricks laying on the ground is generally not considered a system. If you take a brick away, it's still just a pile of bricks laying on the ground. But if you pile the bricks in a certain way so they hold up the corner of a porch, well, then they're doing something, and if you pull one of them out and the corner of the porch falls down, then it's no longer enabled to produce the characteristic that it was producing. So it depends upon the way that you look at them. Now, those who have continued to promote systems thinking have said that it's about thinking about the interaction of the pieces and the way that they interact and what emerges from that interaction, as opposed to the scientific method, which is taking things apart and analyzing the parts and understanding from the understanding of the parts, trying to understand the whole itself. And the tendency has been to throw the baby out with the bathwater and to say that synthesis is good and analysis is bad, and it is in fact not correct. From analysis, you do in fact take things apart and you study the parts so that you can understand the thing itself, though analysis is unable to answer the why questions about things. Like I said, if you take the clock apart and study all the parts, none of the parts give you a sense of keeping track of time. And if you put all the parts together and the clock works and it's running the way it should, you can study that running clock forever, and you will never be able to figure out why a minute is as long as a minute is. You in fact have to study the clock in the context that it operates to be able to understand why the period is the length that it is. So that there is in fact a reason to do analysis and synthesis, so that you consider, let me take care of this. So you do analysis to think about an entity and its pieces and the way that they interact, and then you have to do synthesis to understand how that interacts in its context with other things to understand the why of it. So So it's appropriate to do analysis and synthesis. Either one alone is simply not enough. Now, I think I neglected to mention that if you have questions along the way, just type them in, and I will attempt to see them as they go by and answer them in the context that you generated them, if I can keep track of where I am. So in terms of systems thinking, Bertalanffy, who is considered by most to be the father of modern systems theory, said that systems thinking is a worldview. It's a way of looking at the world. And Senge presented it as a discipline in the fifth discipline in the Art and Practice of the Learning Organization in 1990. And the two are very different in that, well, they're very different in that a discipline has a number of things that you do on an ongoing basis that are considered appropriate for that discipline. And this is a diagram that I found at the Waters Foundation Systems Thinking in Schools project, which I've had people tell me that they could explain systems thinking to their mother with this diagram. And which makes it a very good diagram in terms of here are the kinds of things that one should in fact do and practice on an ongoing basis, which is better than simply saying that systems thinking is a worldview. It gives more clarity in terms of here are the kinds of things that you need to do and get better at on an ongoing basis. Now, in conjunction with this, there is also a rubric that the Waters Foundation project defined that takes a number of dimensions and explains how one can evaluate their level of competence in certain areas based upon the way that they think about things. And so I offer this so that you can look at it and say, okay, here are the kinds of things that one should do, and it's meaningful, though the difficulty with this that I had with systems thinking for years is it doesn't give me a sense about how to go about doing it. If I run into this situation that I talked about before with the systems perspective intent, what things do I do when? I mean, I can't do all these things at one time. The way that people complained about Senge's book in 1990 said that it's an amazing piece of theory, but what do I do on Monday morning? And this picture is in fact sort of the same way. It says, well, now that I understand that all of these things are relevant and I know how to develop my ability to do these kinds of things, how do I know which things to do when? And I'll get to that. Not right here, but I'll get to it. I wanted to also show you this diagram, which came from a Global Health Leadership Forum that was done in November of 2010. It was simply a graphic record of this meeting, and if you look at this, there is an enormous amount of similarity between the content of this drawing and what shows on the habits of a systems thinker model on the previous page. Simply in terms of where is the leverage and distinguishing high leverage points and paying attention to fundamental solutions as opposed to symptomatic solutions and mental models. And so spend some time and look at this and ponder it. It's simply good to reflect on. And what we have learned over time is that there are, in fact, an ongoing, a typical manner in which things evolve, so that if we set out and decide that we're trying to fix a problem, we can progress toward a solution to that problem, and based upon resource constraints, we progress over time but sooner or later progress begins to slow. Or the fix that we apply overshoots the goal and we have to compensate. And sometimes things seem to simply oscillate back and forth on an ongoing basis endlessly. Or the fix that we create creates problems elsewhere. Or over time, well, we decided this was in fact the goal, and because it's taking us so long to get there, over time we decide to settle for less. Or we fix the problem and it comes back again next week or next month or next year, and this happens over and over and over again. Because the situation that we're trying to fix, we're putting Band-Aids on it as opposed to actually addressing the root cause of the solution, though there are in fact times when we develop a dependence on the solution itself, and it's not really a solution. The situation becomes worse because of the dependence that we develop. Or if we are in fact trying to promote growth, the growth leads to decline elsewhere, or partners for growth become adversaries, or we in fact end up promoting growth and that growth slows over time, maybe because there are limited shared resources shared by multiple parties or organizations, or there's more than one limit to be addressed, or the limit is insufficient capacity, or there is a tendency to let the standard slip, which is somewhat related to there's a tendency to settle for less over time. What this represents is a learning over time that we have come to about the fact that there seems to be a well-defined way that things evolve, and if we in fact migrate beyond simply trying to fix the problem and realize why these other things happen, we can in fact think about them and compensate for them before they in fact happen. So as opposed to saying, A happened, let me do B, let me thus think about, well, if I do B, what are the implications of doing that? And I'll show you some examples of that, some today and some of them on Thursday. So this is simply to provide you with a realization that we have developed over time based upon things that have happened on an extremely recurring basis. They are all structural, and the fact that they happen on an ongoing basis is why we call them archetypes, because they do in fact happen over and over and over again. Benjamin, so systems thinking is solving the issue behind a symptom. The common way is mostly aiming to... The question Benjamin asked was, so systems thinking is solving the issue behind a symptom. The common way is mostly aiming to minimize the symptom. For certain situations, Benjamin, yes, simply responding or reacting to the situation directly without stopping to say what's actually causing that situation. Systems thinking says, let me stop and understand why this is happening. And there are times when I in fact have to respond directly to that situation and do something else at the same time, so that I have to survive long enough to solve what's causing the problem. And so sometimes it's a multi-pronged approach, but it is in fact going beyond simply reacting to the situation. Ray wanted to know if that's my drawing that summarizes archetypes. Yes, it is, Ray, and there are about a half a dozen more that have been identified that I need to get woven into that diagram. It's just there aren't enough hours in the day, I guess, but we'll get there. Where was I? So I want to talk a little bit about more more about systems and the nature of them, in that there is a dynamic equilibrium that often exists based upon, I talked about the system maintains its existence. The existence of the system is maintained through the interaction of its parts. And if I think about this diagram and all of these individual nodes having springs between them, and the elements being held in place simply because of the relations that are happening between the elements. If I don't understand what's going on and I decide that I want to change H, I can in fact apply pressure to H, and I can move it. And as long as I continue to apply that focus or pressure, I can move it from where it was and I can keep it there. But what do you think happens as soon as I stop applying that force or pressure? It in fact goes right back to where it was. And it's because of that dynamic nature and the interaction of all of those components. There are in fact a set of system laws that I found in a book by Barry Clemson, which this diagram is the Afghan strategy stability model that has been floating around for, I don't know, a year, a couple years, which never should have been released. It probably did an enormous amount to diminish people's belief in systems thinking. This is the kind of diagram that one develops and thinks about and keeps locked up and doesn't show to anybody else because it's just terribly confusing. But what it says, what the system laws say, is that this system maintains itself because of the interaction of all of these components. It wasn't designed to be this way. It just sort of evolved to be this way. And it has periods or bases of stability punctuated by instability in which it changes. In other words, it's not stable. It may appear stable for a period of time, but then something changes that causes other things to change, and the whole thing changes into something else. And it says that the operation, the way that this system behaves, is more dependent upon those internal interactions than any of the inputs to this system. For the most part, the inputs are irrelevant because the balancing and reinforcing feedback loops have such an impact on the way that it behaves that the inputs don't matter that much. And it also says that for any system that has an output that it wants to maintain, if there is not an associated feedback loop that allows the system to monitor that output will not be maintained. That's a long-winded way of saying what gets measured gets done. The systems perspective provides an understanding of why what gets measured gets done, in fact, makes sense. So you can, and the third aspect of it is that any attempt to control or regulate this system has to be at least as complex as the system itself. Otherwise, the complexity of the system will simply overwhelm that attempt to regulate it. So I often refer back to, when I run into situations where I'm thinking about something, the way that something is working, I often refer back to this diagram and these laws, and I think about, all right, is there some aspect of this that I am in fact not paying attention to when I'm thinking about this other situation and I should be thinking about? Hold on a second. Ray says, ST runs contrary to the quick fix. In the modern world, we haven't much time for anything beyond the quick fix, and so problems remain unsolved. Well, if I buy into that, Ray, it says I'm willing to say that I'm doomed and I should just give up. And I'm not willing to do that. So that if in other words, it is in fact repeatedly said that the majority of the problems that we deal with today are in fact the result of yesterday's solutions. And if you spend time looking at them and thinking about that, that in fact does turn out to be right, or can in fact be substantiated. Though at the same time, I would prefer to say, or prefer to believe, that tomorrow can in fact be better. There is a possibility of tomorrow being better. Otherwise, why bother? So, do I do it all the time? I'm not that good. Though, in fact, there are situations where I, in fact, attempt to figure out how to do exactly what I am promoting, in that I want to figure out how to craft an approach to dealing with this situation which does in fact make the situation better, will continue to make the situation better, and doesn't create new problems in the process. Is it in fact always possible? No, though it's better than what we have done in the past, I believe. So, Benjamin asks, what makes it different to a snapshot of the status quo? So time defines its state. Maybe you could elaborate, Benjamin. I'm not sure I quite understand the question. So, when I think about situations, I have to understand what it is that is responsible for causing the situation to be the way it is. I have to investigate those the relationships. Wait a minute. Oh, all right. Sorry. Oh, all right. The picture that I showed, this picture, this is a qualitative model of the situation. It's like a map of the territory. It is the status quo. Though in reality, what is that? In reality, the model is in fact, the environment is in fact dynamic, and to get a sense of how it is actually evolving over time takes a simulation model and not a rich picture or a causal relationship diagram. So this is in fact a snapshot which just gives me a sense of what the elements are and what they interact with, which provides a better level of understanding than no model, though not the kind of understanding that's usually requisite. I can run into situations where building a model helps me. Well, let me move forward with this piece. There are multiple ways, multiple kinds of diagrams, models that one can build. Last week I talked about quite a few of them in the session on modeling and simulation with Insight Maker. And that session, the 2 videos for that session are online, and I'll probably do the sessions again next month. Because I'm thinking about more than just cause and effect, A influences B. There are in fact a number of entities and relationships between those, and any time the situation gets to have more than a couple of pieces interacting, I simply cannot keep track of things without building a model. I have come across lots and lots of people who claim to be systems thinkers, and they never seem to build any models. And maybe I just need to take notes from them in terms of how they manage to keep track of all of these interactions that are happening at the same time, and they never draw any pictures. I've been at this for 30 years now, and I haven't yet figured out how to do it. But here is an approach that I use on an ongoing basis, which is I start with a situation. I describe the situation that I want to understand. In this one, it is if one can put money in an investment account and it grows over time, and it grows even faster with regular deposits, why aren't more people rich and ready for retirement? I've started numerous retirement programs through the years, though for one reason or another they've all evaporated in time. What is the basis for the said state of affairs? So it's simply investigating, and what I'm doing is I'm trying to synthesize the relationships that I think come into play, and I start with an investment account, and I say, well, the investment account isn't anything unless I actually deposit some money into it. And because it's an investment account someplace, periodically, based upon an interest rate, interest is created, which causes the investment account to grow. And it's possible to actually make the deposit regular deposits on an ongoing basis, and I'm capable of making withdrawals from the account, though to encourage people to, well, before that, to think about where do the deposits come from. Well, I have an income and I have expenses, and that represents what's the difference between them represents cash, and some of that I can deposit. But more often than not, when I have cash in my pocket, I tend to go spend it rather than investing it. So I could in fact do direct deposits, which come out of my pay before I get them, which improves the probability that I actually save the money. And because in an attempt to encourage me to leave the money in the investment account, there are penalties for early withdrawal from retirement accounts, though the difficulty is that as the investment account gets larger and larger, its attractiveness grows also, and therefore, because of all of the other things that I might do with it, I in fact withdraw the money and suffer the penalty because of something that I want, as opposed to, or something that I actually have to do because of some emergency or whatever. And so this is a set of thoughts that evolve around the question that I posed at the beginning. That's one example. Another example is that I have a situation where I have crop-eating insects which are in fact damaging my crops, and I know that it is in fact those crop-eating insects which are damaging my crops. And over the years, I've continued to spray for insects, but it seems that year after year I have to spray more to kill the insects, and it seems to be a never-ending battle, and I'm not getting anywhere. So if I stop and think about this in some additional detail, yes, the crop damage encourages me to apply pesticides, and because I know that the pesticides kill the crop-eating insects, and this diagram is specifically a causal loop diagram, which is an outgrowth of the system dynamics community. It's a way to explain the findings of a stock and flow simulation that is less complex than the actual simulation model itself. And it's meant to say that plus signs are reinforcing influences, and minus signs are balancing influences, and depending upon what happens around the loop, loops end up being balancing loops or reinforcing loops, depending upon the number of minus signs in the loop. So that if there is an odd number of minus signs, it is in fact a balancing loop. If there are an even number, it's a reinforcing loop. So this is a balancing loop because the essence of crop-eating insects is to reduce crop-eating insects. The whole loop is intended to control crop-eating insects. Now, if I continue to think about what else happens, well, what else happens is I know that crop-eating insects have a tendency to give birth to new insects. I mean, it's when I apply pesticides, I don't kill all of them. So the ones that I don't kill have births, and the births increase the number of crop-eating insects, and there are no balancing influences in this loop, so it is in fact a reinforcing structure. If there was nothing to limit it, it would demonstrate an exponential growth pattern, and that's why it's called a reinforcing loop. Continuing on with this, I also know that applying pesticides seems to promote the insects develop an immunity to the pesticides, which in fact results in more crop-eating insects because the pesticides that I'm applying isn't killing so many of them. So if I follow this loop from crop-eating insects to crop damage to apply pesticides to pesticide immunity back to crop-eating insects, they're all positive influences, and this is another reinforcing structure, which is an immunity loop, which means that this loop is moving me absolutely in the opposite direction that I want to go. It's promoting more and more crop-eating insects as opposed to less. Continuing on with this thought, applying pesticides also kills controlling insects. And the controlling insects used to devour some of the crop-eating insects. So if I now follow this loop from crop-eating insects to crop damage to apply pesticides to killing controlling insects to devouring crop-eating insects, I have two balancing influences which cancel each other out, and I have another reinforcing structure which is also moving me in a direction that I don't want to go. And this isn't the end of it. This is simply, I continue to ask myself in these instances, what else does this influence? And what else influences it? What's relevant to the situation that I'm trying to understand? With regard to the controlling insects, rather than apply pesticides to kill them, maybe I could figure out how to promote more controlling insects so that they could devour the crop-eating insects and I wouldn't have to apply pesticide. And if I do that, then I should also say, okay, if I promote the controlling insects and they kill all the crop-eating insects, what are they going to eat next? Because they'll want to eat something. And if this food supply goes away, have I just created another problem for myself the day after tomorrow? And if I continue to apply pesticides, how long is it before it actually leaches into my water supply so that my wells aren't good anymore, so I have to truck water in for myself and the animals on the farm? I mean, this is the thought pattern that typically happens, and it never ends. As a matter of fact, it just continues to get worse on an ongoing basis. Every year, it requires more pesticide to control the insects. The only way out of this structure is to think one's way out of it, to find avenues that, in fact, help promote a better tomorrow as opposed to simply trying to make the crop-eating insects go away and dealing with the problem that causes. Now, when I just, hold on, let's see. Ray, what are you doing to me now? Snapshot. Ray, it's probably a good question, though too much for my feeble mind to think about in a microsecond. So when the session's over, all of the questions are sent to me via email, and I do a Q&A page that will get posted online with the video from the session itself, so that the questions that I in fact don't answer in the session, the answers will be online. So typically when I try to explain this to people, there have been numerous times where people have said that systems thinking is just too hard and it's too complex and it's too much for my mind to think about. And one day I really got fed up and I wrote this. I am a farmer. I plant crops. I sell crops to make money. I lose money when bugs eat crops. I spray to kill bugs. Each year more bugs to kill. I spray more to kill bugs. I don't know why. Sid the science kid was here to play with Tim yesterday. Sid asked about crops. I told Sid about bugs. Sid said there are bad bugs and good bugs. Sid said good bugs eat bad bugs. Sid said, when I spray to kill bad bugs and good bugs. When I spray, I kill bad bugs and good bugs. When I kill good bugs, they don't eat so many bad bugs. That's why I have to spray more to kill bad bugs. Sid said, help good bugs grow more so they eat more bad bugs. Sid also said, can't do just one thing. Sid said, have to think before act. Think what will also happen from act. Think what will happen from result. Think what will make result hard. Maybe other people know more. Maybe they can help what to do. Maybe they can help what not to do. Sid said, mostly problems happen when people don't think right. Sid said, answer mostly think and what else? I think this is not too hard. I didn't make any friends with this post, but I felt better. There's a couple of articles that are in the outline, which is in fact this pest control actually written out in a 2 or 3 page article. It's an attempt on my part to reduce synthesis to a one-word approach called and, so that for every element in the structure I stop and ask myself, and what else does this influence and what influences it? And at the same time, the realization is that the person who is really trying to do systems thinking understands that it is in fact the balancing and reinforcing structures within the system that are primarily responsible for the way it behaves, so that we seek them out to understand how those balancing and reinforcing structures are influencing what's happening, as opposed to thinking about it in terms of simply cause and effect. Back to the system laws and the patterns primarily being the responsibility of the balancing and reinforcing loops. I think I'm running out of time. So this particular situation that I talked about, back to the beginning, I have a situation, I need to develop an understanding, and I need to understand the way that all of the pieces interact that are causing the situation to be what it is, so that I can develop this strategy that will in fact improve the situation. If I don't understand why this situation is the way it is, and I attempt to deal with it, I think all I'm doing is meddling. It's like flying while blind. And it, from a systems thinking perspective, it is in fact structural. next week in the sessions, when I talk about actually developing a systemic perspective, this is the model that I will explain, so that the piece here that says understanding and strategy development, well, the understanding is actually involved in all of these other elements, so that from the situation I have to understand the behavior, and I develop a model, and in conjunction with all of the stakeholders that are in fact responsible for this model, we establish a set of boundaries, understand the assumptions that we have in fact made, and then look for the leverage points in this model so that we can then use that understanding to develop that strategy, which is adopted by the shareholders. And when it's actually employed, it improves the situation, minimizing the unintended consequences. So this is just a sort of a preview of next week. And at the same time that I say this, and I talked a moment about using causal loop diagrams to help understand the situation, once upon a time I thought systems thinking was a not very grown-up version of system dynamics. Fortunately, and with great thanks to numerous other people, my mind grew up a little to understand that system dynamics and that flavor of causal loop diagrams, which the people in the U.S. have a tendency to consider as systems thinking, is one flavor of systems thinking from the work of Michael C. Jackson in the UK. I came to understand that there is in fact an entire suite of models and methods that embrace the systems thinking paradigm that are appropriate to use in different situations, so that depending upon whether the system being considered is a well-defined, well-structured system that you can conceive that you could design and construct, or it's one of these messes that's evolved over time, and whether the participants in that context have a set of values and beliefs that are well aligned and pursuing the same set of objectives, or whether they're somewhat aligned and can come into alignment in certain instances to pursue certain ends, or whether the group of people that will never agree on anything, like the U.S. Congress. There are different types of systems, there are different models and methods that are appropriate in those contexts, though they all involve models of understanding, and this gets wrapped into this in terms of how this group of stakeholders pursues the understanding and the development of this strategy. So that's sort of a preview of next week. And this Systemic Perspective Foundations is that, if you want to get into it, there are a couple of new items here on the systems wiki. I've broken this out so they're easier to get to. The foundations piece is in fact an elaboration of the development of those pieces of the model, if you want to go ahead and look at them ahead of time. And in addition, I've been working on this thing called 1 + 1 =, which is the development of a set of small reconfigurable modules that people can use to put together learning programs based upon what it is, what aspect of systems thinking they're interested in understanding. And there are in fact about almost 90 of these that are in fact short 6 to 10 minute videos that have been put together to this point, which you can review and use as you wish. Each one of these links will take you to a wiki page that has an embedded video, and it tells you all of the elements used in the video and related pieces. The videos are all in YouTube, and you are welcome to use them as you wish. So, as I said, the webinar is free. Donations are most welcome. And in part 2 of this, on Thursday, I will talk about a little bit more about why we create models, why I like Insight Maker, and I will go through a number of models, both qualitative and quantitative, that have been developed over time that hopefully help reinforce the perspective of why it makes sense to build models to understand situations better, so that when you in fact attempt to address them, you are much more likely to put together an approach that accomplishes what you're attempting to accomplish. So if you're not already registered for Thursday, please go to the webinars page and register for the second session on Thursday, same time, same bat time, same bat channel. Ray has another question. I suppose one of the difficulties with ST is that it is often inconclusive. People want simple solutions to complex problems and put off until tomorrow any unintended consequences. Yep, Ray, that's pretty concise. We want simple answers to complex problems, and the flawed mental model is we believe that they exist, so we do it. I mean, it's the reason that we have gone from one set of management feds to another, from the Formula 50s to the sensitive 60s to the strategic 70s to the excellent 80s to the nanosecond 90s to the low O's, and it just people simply will not give up the belief that there is a simple answer to complex situations. You know, I want to solve this problem before noon so I can get on to something else. Well, you can solve it before noon, and then you can solve it again before noon tomorrow and the next day and next week and next month, and oh well. Any other questions? This is actually 2 sessions. I finished on time. I'm amazed. Maybe I should add some more content. Well, I do so hope that you have found it interesting, engaging, thought-provoking, and I hope you come back and spend another hour on Thursday. And the session, as I said, the session next week, the 2 sessions next week, will in fact be an unfolding of why I believe that this model makes sense, and why it's not done, why I'm still working on it. So thank you very much, and have a great day. Bye.